The last message from my family arrived just 3 minutes before my flight began boarding, and it shattered something inside me that years of danger had never managed to break. It simply said that I should stay away because my presence would ruin the happiest day of my younger brother's life. And as I stared at those words, inside the crowded airport terminal, I realized complete strangers had shown me more kindness than the people who had known me since birth. My name is Rebecca Carter. I am 45 years old, and I recently retired after serving more than 2 decades as a rescue helicopter pilot with the United States Coast Guard. I spent years flying into violent storms, pulling frightened people from sinking boats, and risking my own life for complete strangers, yet nothing prepared me for discovering that the people I loved most had quietly decided there was no place left for me in their lives. The wedding had been planned for months. After years of growing apart, I paid for my parents' airline tickets, surprised my brother Ethan with an upgraded honeymoon suite, and even arranged a private dinner overlooking the waterfront, hoping those thoughtful gestures would help heal old wounds that had never truly disappeared. Instead of calling to explain their decision, my mother allowed my brother to send the message while she remained completely silent, and somehow that silence hurt even more than the rejection itself because it reminded me of my childhood. She had always found it easier to look away whenever I was treated unfairly, leaving me to convince myself that if I worked harder, sacrificed more, and expected less, one day I would finally earn the love that always seemed to come so easily for everyone else. For several long moments, I stood near the boarding gate, watching happy families laugh together while children chased one another across the polished airport floor, and I wondered what it felt like to belong somewhere without having to prove your worth every single day. When the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, I slipped my phone into my jacket pocket without replying to the message because there were no words left that could repair a relationship already broken by years of quiet disappointment. I stepped onto the aircraft with the calm expression that years of emergency missions had taught me to wear, even though my heart felt heavier with every step down the narrow aisle. The familiar scent of coffee, clean cabin air, and polished metal usually brought me comfort because airplanes had always represented hope to me. But that morning they only reminded me that I was flying toward people who no longer wanted me there. My boarding pass placed me in a comfortable window seat near the front of the cabin, and I quietly stored my travel bag before settling into the seat with my hands folded neatly across my lap. Only a few minutes passed before a friendly flight attendant approached with an apologetic smile and gently asked whether I would be willing to exchange my seat so another family could remain together during the flight. And the moment I looked toward the first few rows, I immediately recognized my parents, Ethan, and his fiancée pretending not to notice me. I understood exactly what had happened without anyone saying another word because my family had chosen comfort over compassion once again, and they preferred that I remain as far away from them as possible until we reached Seattle. I could have refused because the seat belonged to me, but after carrying emotional burdens for most of my life, giving up one more place felt strangely familiar, so I thanked the flight attendant for asking politely and followed her toward the back of the aircraft without creating a scene. My new seat was a cramped middle seat surrounded by strangers who were completely unaware that the woman sitting beside them had just been quietly pushed out of her own family's life, and I fastened my seat belt while staring at the seat in front of me to keep my emotions under control. As passengers laughed, shared vacation plans, and helped one another store their luggage, I found myself remembering childhood dinners, where Ethan was celebrated for every small success while my achievements were met with little more than polite nods before the conversation quickly moved on. Those old memories returned with surprising clarity as the engine slowly came to life beneath the cabin floor, because I suddenly realized that nothing had truly changed despite everything I had accomplished over the years. I had rescued countless people who would never forget my face, yet the family I had spent my entire life trying to impress could still look directly through me as though I had never mattered at all. And that painful truth settled quietly inside me while the aircraft prepared for departure. The aircraft slowly rolled away from the gate, and I turned my attention toward the small window across the aisle because watching the runway lights drift past was easier than thinking about the people sitting several rows ahead pretending I did not exist. I reminded myself that I had survived freezing oceans, violent storms, and rescue missions where every second meant the difference between life and death, so surely I could survive one more painful flight without allowing my emotions to take control. A young woman wearing a nursing school sweatshirt settled into the seat beside me just before the cabin doors closed, and, after offering a warm smile, she noticed the faded Coast Guard patch stitched onto my travel bag resting beneath the seat. She asked if I had once served as a rescue pilot, because her father often spoke about an incredible woman who flew through impossible weather to save his fishing crew many years earlier. And although I quietly admitted that I had served, I simply smiled instead of telling her that I was the pilot from the story. Before I could ask another question, the aircraft unexpectedly stopped near the runway instead of accelerating for takeoff, and confused whispers quickly spread through the cabin as passengers exchanged uncertain looks with one another. A calm announcement came over the speaker explaining that there would be a brief delay before departure. But only moments later the cockpit door opened and the captain stepped into the aisle, carefully looking from one row to another as though searching for someone very specific. When his eyes finally met mine, he immediately walked toward the back of the aircraft with steady confidence until he stopped beside my seat, and every nearby conversation faded into complete silence as passengers watched the unusual scene unfold. He introduced himself as Captain Andrew Mitchell and asked if I was Commander Rebecca Carter. Then with unmistakable emotion in his voice he explained that 20 years earlier I had rescued him after his Coast Guard helicopter crashed into rough water during a deadly winter rescue mission. A day he said he would never forget for as long as he lived. Captain Mitchell turned toward the entire cabin and spoke with quiet pride as he told everyone that courage deserved recognition no matter where a person was sitting, because the woman hidden in the back of the aircraft had saved countless lives, including his own, without ever asking for praise in return. He then apologized for the way I had been treated, personally invited me to move to seat 1A at the front of the plane, and as I slowly stood to follow him through the silent cabin, I could feel that something far greater than my seating assignment had just changed forever. When I reached seat 1A, Captain Andrew Mitchell waited until I was comfortably seated before quietly thanking me once more for giving him a second chance at life so many years ago, and the sincerity in his voice carried more warmth than I had received from my own family in decades. As he returned to the cockpit, several passengers offered gentle smiles and respectful nods, making me realize that genuine respect often comes from people who know your character instead of your last name. A few minutes after we reached cruising altitude, a middle-aged man walked carefully toward my seat and introduced himself as Thomas Sullivan, explaining that his daughter had been trapped during a devastating coastal flood nearly 15 years earlier. He told me that I had ignored dangerous weather warnings to bring her and several other children to safety when rescue teams believed the mission was impossible. And with tears filling his eyes, he shared that she was now a successful teacher with a beautiful family because I had refused to give up on complete strangers. Not long afterward, the young nursing student from the back of the aircraft approached carrying a small envelope that had clearly been opened many times over the years, and she explained that the photograph inside showed her father standing beside the rescue helicopter after surviving the storm that had changed his life forever. She placed the picture gently into my hands and said her father always hoped he would someday meet the brave pilot who never stopped believing that every life was worth saving, and hearing those words reminded me that kindness always leaves a lasting mark even when recognition arrives years later. As I carefully slipped the photograph into my jacket pocket, I noticed someone standing quietly near the curtain separating the cabins, and after a long moment I recognized my brother Ethan, looking more nervous than I had ever seen him before. He admitted that he had known about the hurtful message before it was sent and confessed that he stayed silent because confronting the family seemed more difficult than protecting his own sister. Then he lowered his head and apologized with a sincerity that finally sounded real instead of convenient. I listened without anger because carrying bitterness had already stolen too many years from my life, and I calmly told Ethan that forgiveness could begin with honest words, but trust could only return through honest actions over time. He nodded with tears forming in his eyes before quietly walking back toward his seat, and although our family was still deeply broken, I felt something inside me become lighter because I no longer needed their approval to understand my own worth. The remainder of the flight passed in peaceful silence, and for the first time in many years I allowed myself to enjoy the journey instead of worrying about whether someone else approved of the choices I had made throughout my life. As the airplane descended through the clouds toward Seattle, I looked out the window at the sparkling water below and realized that true peace arrives when you stop chasing acceptance from people who have already decided not to see your value. After we landed, I remained in my seat until most of the passengers had stepped into the aisle because I no longer felt the need to rush after anyone or compete for anyone. Attention, as I finally walked through the terminal, several young Coast Guard cadets noticed the insignia on my jacket, respectfully nodded in my direction, and thanked me for my years of service, reminding me that honor is often recognized by those who understand the sacrifices behind it. A few days later, after returning home to Colorado, I found an official envelope waiting in my mailbox with the seal of the United States Coast Guard carefully stamped across the front, and inside was a letter announcing a special commendation recognizing decades of exceptional courage, leadership, and selfless service. I quietly placed the framed certificate beside photographs from past rescue missions, not because I needed another award, but because it represented every life that had been saved through teamwork, determination, and hope during the most difficult moments imaginable. Looking back now, I understand that I spent far too many years believing love had to be earned through endless sacrifice, while the truth was that real love never asks someone to become invisible just to make everyone else comfortable. My family may never fully repair the distance that grew between us, but I have finally discovered that my greatest victory was not surviving dangerous rescue missions or receiving military honors. It was learning to respect myself enough to stop accepting less than I deserved. If my story has taught you anything, I hope it reminds you that your value is never determined by the opinions of people who refuse to appreciate your heart, your courage, or your kindness, because the right people will always recognize those qualities even if it takes many years for them to find you. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.